And now, time to move to an Afghan newsroom. What is it like to control a newsroom in a conflict-prone area? So let's invite Mr. Lotfullah Najafizada, editor, TOLO News, Afghanistan, and he would be in conversation with Ms. Prerna Sahani, deputy editor, Dainik Bhaskar. Can we please put our hands together? I would request Mr. Lotfullah Najafizada to kindly come up the stage, and also Ms. Prerna Sahani. Mike. I'll hand over to Ms. Prerna Sahani now.
A very good evening to all of you present here. I think Lakshmi Prasad Pant sir has given a very beautiful precursor of what we as journalists do in our newsrooms to get you that tiniest bit of information that is relevant and important for you to the newspapers, right? And also through the electronic channels. Cut to. Let us imagine a scene in Afghanistan. There are a group of reporters who are not less than crusaders. We only have heard of our soldiers who fight at the borders. But think about the reporters who are reporting from the borderlines of information, the concealed information that they try to dig out and get to your hands, to your mobiles, to your TV, to your newspapers. That's an indelible experience for a reporter, and an indelible experience and a full load of information for the reader and the audience. Imagine a scene in Afghanistan wherein the reporters have walked out to actually report an incident in Afghanistan, in an area, in a domain that is prominently led by none other than the eclipse of Talibanis. What happens to them? There is a suicide bomb attack. 7 of them are killed for no fault of theirs. They were just reporting. 17 of them terribly wounded. And this is what is a TOLO newsroom all about. Let us talk to Mr. Lotfullah and understand what are the pains behind the journalism that he does.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be in India. It's great to be in Jaipur. It's my second time here. This is a fascinating city. And today I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to all of you. Most importantly, a lot of journalism students who are the future generation of journalists, not just in India, but in the entire region, in our part of the world. Media in Afghanistan is such a success story, and today we talk about over 200 TV channels, radio stations, and hundreds of newspapers throughout the country. Why this number is important? Probably not so much compared to India, but Afghanistan is a country that in the past 50 years of its history has gone through so much, from monarchy to communism, to civil war, to Islamic government, to no government, to to Taliban, and now to democracy. What we have had in common throughout history was the fact that the Afghan people were silenced. They could not express their views, but in the past 15 years, thanks to a new constitution, thanks to a new government, thanks to democracy, thanks to the fact that Afghanistan is embraced by the international community as a new member, the country has opened up to so many media outlets, TV, newspapers, and radio stations, news agencies throughout the country. And it has given the Afghan people a new opportunity to express their voices, a new opportunity to interact with the rest of the world. Today, Afghan media covers elections in the US, covers elections in the region, covers major stories in the Middle East, and indeed covers a lot of stories throughout Afghanistan, a country of 30 million people with a lot of untold stories. So I think the Afghan media has certainly given the people of Afghanistan a voice that they never had throughout the history.
Okay, in your newsroom and in your news studio, when we talk of the coverage part, you discussed that 2/3 of the coverage is still pertaining to the war. So what is an ideal good news for Afghanistan that you bring to light through your newsrooms?
That's true. It's unfortunate that we are stuck with an insurgency and ongoing, and it's so serious that the civilian casualties last year was more than 10,000 people, and that's our primary responsibility to cover such tragic incidents. Just this morning, there was a major attack on one of the largest Afghan cities in southern Afghanistan. And thank God that the insurgents are pushed back. The good story is that Afghanistan has a new generation. And that generation makes 2/3 of the Afghan population. So 2/3 of our population is under the age of 25. So they barely remember the Taliban time, let alone the civil war, the communism, and what happened before. So they represent a new country. They represent, like so many of the youth here today and the students, they carry similar ambitions as you do. They are as much connected to the rest of the world as you are. And they have bigger dreams for the future. I think that is probably the biggest positive story of the country, that we are very hopeful that they will transform the society and the country to a better one in the coming future.
I would love to hear some examples of a good news from a good newsroom.
It's interesting because every day when I go to my morning editorial meeting, I press my journalists for more positive stories, because it's important. In a country like Afghanistan, people are tired of sad stories. People are tired of security stories. And positive stories are very much welcomed. For instance, if there's a new cafe in town, we go and profile the owner. And recently we profiled a cafe in Kabul owned by a new female entrepreneur. And that was such a light, but at the same time energetic, positive story that we did. And we're trying to do more of that. And a lot of it is in the sphere of social and cultural change. But governance and politics and security is unfortunately not in the area where we can find a lot of positive stories.
There was a time when your teammates were attacked and some of them perished in the Taliban attack, that you decided to shut down the newsroom. But then there was something because of which you came back. You decided not to succumb to the pressure. Although there were people who were supporting you, there were people from the journalism fraternity who said that we will not publish, we will not mention, we will not cover Talibanis anymore. But then you decided to put your foot down and still continue with the news channel. What made you, come again, rise again with that gut and gumption?
I think because we've come a long way. After the attack in January 2016, it was such a terrible attack that we lost, as you said, 7 of our dear colleagues and friends. And for a private news channel, that's a very heavy cost to bear. We consulted with all of our staff members, and over 90% of them decided that we should continue because there is no way back for us. We've come a long way, and we must continue. And we must continue with more resilience and with more commitment. The Afghan media said we should boycott the Taliban, we shouldn't give them coverage. And my argument was that in order to respect professional media, we can't boycott stories which are relevant to Afghan people. So if Taliban are behind the stories which are important for people to know, we should certainly publish and broadcast those stories. So we've continued, but that was not the last attack. We lost, in 2016, we lost, I think 17 journalists, but in 2017, we lost 21 journalists. And in 2018, so far, we have lost nearly 10 journalists throughout the country. So this is a continuing tragic story that journalists are being targeted in security incidents or specifically. But this is a country where a lot of people die, as I said. More civilians die, more security forces die. I think in the past 1 year, more than 10,000 civilians dead, more than 4,000 security personnel are killed. And certainly journalists are among the Afghans living in that society, so they are being affected. But it doesn't affect the fact that journalists are brave and they can tell stories. So Afghanistan is very proud to have one of the freest media in the entire region. You pick up the map, look at Afghanistan and all its immediate neighbors, from Iran to Pakistan to China to all Central Asian countries. We are the shining bulb of free press in that particular part of the world. And that has to be maintained because it's important for us, it's important for all of us in this region to support and to have independent media.
2 questions spring from this springboard. I think the audience has taken it well. So one is that how and why does your family basically permit you to be a part of journalism, which is so much under threat, where there's a threat of life every single moment, every single day? And I read that you also spend mostly your nights in your studio because of safety reasons. So how is it that your families actually, permit you? Because there's a lot of things, a lot of lives at stake. And I'm talking of the entire crusaders of 100 journals that you have in your team.
Right. It's funny because in 2003, when we as family, speaking on a personal note, we decided to do something. Because during the Taliban, our family was so much troubled because they were in the government before, we said we should do something less controversial. We shouldn't go to government. We shouldn't do politics. We said we can probably open up a newspaper and launch a newspaper and do cultural stuff. And then later on, we realized that media was probably the most controversial thing we could get into. And that's true that a lot of us are under family pressure, not just me. But our argument is very simple. What other choices we have? We have chosen to be in Afghanistan, and we have chosen this profession to make a difference because I outlined the importance of free media. And because of that particular fact, I think we've managed to convince our families, I've managed to convince my mother, that it's important for all of us to stay in the business and continue. Because we believe that this will change. We believe that Afghanistan will have a peaceful future. And if we continue to build on what we've built on so far in media, that will be probably Afghanistan's greatest achievement in the future.
And specifically, more so, you could not disconnect from Taliban because I think out of 34 provinces that you have, 20 are predominantly in touch closely with Taliban as well as the Afghan military.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. The Taliban insurgency is very widespread. We report about war almost non-stop. And often we go to the Taliban-controlled areas and we talk to them, we interview them. It was historic that in the past Eid, there was a ceasefire between the government and the Taliban. And the Taliban, in thousands, they came to Afghan cities. So they went to ice cream shops. I don't know if they went to cinemas, but they had a lot of fun. And then they went back to their forts and fields. But we are in touch with the Taliban. Journalists are giving the Taliban the right to express their views, and sometimes we challenge them as well. Also, their leadership in Doha and Qatar, and their leadership in Pakistan.
Now tell me one thing, like when we go out in search of a news that really can impact lives, within the premises of Jaipur city I'm talking, we have to just go with our information and sources, wherein when you're exploring or when you're venturing into such dangerous terrains which are predominantly governed by Talibans, what is that you equip your reporters with? Because they're very vulnerable.
Right.
And anything at any moment can go wrong with them. So what is the difference? Because we cannot go without, we can always go without a set of sources and with a mighty pen. But I'm sure that more muscle would be required than pen in your case.
That's true. First of all, we debate the fact that whether a story worth a journalist's life or not. Sometimes we think it does, because if a story saves lives, it's worth taking lives as well. If a story is in the interest of the greater good, for the greater good, and it saves a lot of lives, I think journalists are, especially in Afghanistan, where violence is so widespread, they are committed and determined to go after these stories. When we go, for instance, when our teams go out, we make sure that certainly they have their pen and notebooks, but they should have their security team, they should have their body armor, they should have their helmets if they go cover security incidents. And we make sure that we talk to local authorities, that they are aware that these journalists are visiting a particular areas, and we have a backup team to ensure that they are within the radar, and we keep an eye on them. So it's logistically it's difficult, and it makes jobs of people like myself and the management a little bit more complicated, but at the same time it certainly adds to our responsibilities to protect our journalists.
And a very brilliant information that he shared before we came for this interview was that 21% of the reporters, the editorial team in his newsroom comprise of women, which is a very big ratio. So a very big round of applause for that, definitely.
That's true. Female journalists in Afghanistan are very committed. We have so many of them in our newsroom, and they go after very serious stories. Corruption stories, security stories, women's stories, and they are as fearless as their male colleagues.
Imagine while we in our country are hearing so many cases of rape, how difficult it would be to expose the rape cases of students from a women university, which was in the Taliban-dominated territory, which they exposed, and you also exposed mass murders. I'm sure you must have got some severe threats from Taliban, because they referred that you are basically an intelligence, a kind of an informer for international bodies. And you're not really reporters, but then you are a part of the intelligence team of international bodies. So how did you react to that? Because that's a very big thing.
We had no other choice but to explain the fact that we follow ethics of journalism, and we follow stories regardless of what kind of consequences they may have. Because if you do consider consequences, every story might have a consequence, and then you apply censorship. So we have certainly boosted our security. We have tried to explain to those people who threaten us, including the Taliban, that that's not our intention. And in a country like Afghanistan, where you have an ongoing war and troops from more than 40 countries, this is true that a lot of countries have their own interests. And this blame game of who is who and who works for who and who plays what role is quite obvious and is quite common. But it doesn't apply to media, because media is representing the new Afghanistan, and media is most of the Afghan media is very, very free.
Tell me something about the stories that were, tried to be nipped in bud, for which, you were pressurized, or your reporters and the editorial team was pressurized to nip those stories in the bud so that they are not revealed. They do not come out in the public domain at all. Tell us about some of those stories.
Well, because thanks to the strength of media in my country, it's very rare that I get phone calls from officials, especially in the government, who can talk in a louder voice. But there are stories certainly that are making a lot of noise and putting us in a situation to deal with them in a serious matter. I can name a few stories which have made great impacts, but at the same time created a lot of issues. We broke a story a couple of years ago on a gang rape in Kabul, and that was in the heart of the capital. And because of that story, there was a national debate generated, and the 5 men who were involved were sentenced to capital punishment within weeks. And that is because of the strength of media. The other story, which I can remember right now and was pretty recent, was the fact that we exposed the Speaker of our Parliament, which is a very powerful branch of the government, was misusing public money for his own interests. And because of our stories, the Speaker came out publicly and apologized for it and said that he's going to return the money that he misused or he used for his own personal expenses. And then the third story, which I can remember, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we exposed a secret deal between the government of national unity, which is our current government, and the intelligence department of the current government with the Pakistani intelligence, giving ISI very unprecedented access to our to our intelligence department. And because we broke that deal, the government had to take it back. So it didn't go anywhere. I think there are so many examples which brought a lot of changes and made a lot of impact. But these are some of the stories that I can remember.
Okay, let us move to Bollywood now, because I think Afghan has a very, very good, big craving for the Bollywood thing, and it has a big appetite for our actors, particularly because Amitabh Bachchan and Sridevi, they have been an all-time favorite. But then, while you explain about the cravings and the liking for Bollywood, I would also like to know that what is the contrast that you see now, because there was a regime of Taliban in 1990s wherein there was a complete restriction on TV, music.
True.
And now in your 24/7 channel, you have a complete music and entertainment episode also running. So what is the contrast that you see, and of course, including Bollywood?
I have to say that we are no less fan of Bollywood than Indians. We love Indian movies, and we try to get hold of them as soon as they're out. The Afghan people understand Hindi, most of them, and that's thanks to watching in Indian films. So that is also demonstrating the fact that the Indian Bollywood and Indian cinema has a huge cultural impact on our society. And India, I have to say, is the most loved country in Afghanistan. That is, I think, Bollywood certainly has a role. But also, the Indian government in the past 15 years, I have to say, has made very generous contributions to reconstruction of Afghanistan. They have committed more than $2 billion to rebuilding Afghanistan and making India one of the great donors in reconstruction of the country.
Okay, now for all the budding journalists, you have to listen to this very carefully, because when we have young journalists who become the news leaders rather than news makers, what are the things that can be a takeaway for all of us? Now, a very important point to be noted is that when our narratives in most of, thank you for reminding the timeline, in most of the media, most of our narratives, they are highlighting the nationalism, the nationalist movements through the media. There is something more important that the budding journalists have to understand. That is to think beyond the borders that have been etched by the political parties, right? We have to grow beyond that, because they are not just geographical boundaries that we are talking about that we have to navigate. There is much more to that, and that is there are people on either side of the borders with whom we can empathize, we can relate, we can actually find some kind of a connect because of our common histories, our shared cultures and whatnot. I think we have a very big learning, and I would like you to share this with them, the budding journalists.
I think it's important for us in South Asia to interact more within the region and beyond. When there is a big story happening in one of our countries, we see journalists coming from all over the world, mostly Western media, but we don't see so many regional journalists from our own region to go and do stories. That has to change. Second, we have so much in common: culture, history, traditions, and that has to be told. And I think this is the responsibility of media, especially the next generation of journalists. They should certainly think beyond the political borders, beyond certain territories. We often follow stories which gives us good rankings, which gives us good public reaction. But we should not forget that those stories which are not popular, those stories which may result into criticism, are also important for people to know. So journalists have the responsibility to tell all kind of stories, and especially the next generation journalists, because media in our part of the world is changing quite significantly and dramatically. And we have to equip ourselves for that, because no story is made for a particular geography or a particular area. If you do a story in Jaipur, don't forget that you may have audience in Africa, you may have people interested in watching you or following you in America, in Europe, or in East Asia. It's important to keep that in mind, that media is very much globalized, and the audience is globalized and is shrinking into one pot. I think we should engage with them. We shouldn't just talk about each other. We should talk with each other, and we should give people the right to express themselves in our coverage. If you talk, let's say, if you watch an Indian story on Afghanistan, see if they're interviewing Afghans, right? Or if they are bringing Indian experts to talk about it. If we do a story on India, I don't know if we're giving Indians a chance to be part of that. I think bringing local expertise, giving locals the right to be part of our stories, but at the same time keeping the widest spectrum of audience into account is very, very important.
I think, and he was narrating a very beautiful example on how Islamabad, Delhi, and Kabul, they had collaborated for coming up with their crusade against terrorism. That's right?
Yes. We had a show linking the three capitals live with audience and panels, experts from the three capitals to talk about terrorism. Well, you can expect how the show went, but certainly it was a great example that media can do a lot in the region, and we're determined to do more of that.
Wonderful. One last question that just sprung out of curiosity. Is the Taliban still bent, towards its ideological fight against non-Muslims, or is it now fighting to quench maybe its thirst for the basic amenities like food and income generation, and a complete sustainable livelihood for their families? Is there a shift that you see?
I think it's all of the above. People fight for money. People fight for ideological reasons. People fight for power, and people fight because they have no other choice, and people fight because they have suffered, and they have lost their loved ones, and they have grievances. I think most of the Taliban insurgency is, in my view, is driven by poverty and driven by lack of resources and lack of jobs. And because insurgency has turned into such a rich business for so many countries, and they are funding the Taliban. So Taliban leadership are in Pakistan, as we all know, and the money is coming from all the way from Gulf countries to poppy cultivation within the country. And there are people who are rich in the Arab world and sponsoring jihad in our country.
Thank you so much. The House is now open for questions. If you have any questions, kindly raise your hand. I think there's time for very few questions. I'm getting a signal from here.
Hello.
Can someone please pass the mic?
Yeah, hi, here.
Thank you.
My name is Takshak. I'm a student at the School of Communication, Manipal.
You're not audible.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, hi. My name is Takshak. I'm a student at the School of Communication in Manipal, in Karnataka. Given the interest of, events in Afghanistan to viewers in India and Pakistan, has there been any sort of, engagement between TOLO News and the media in either of these two countries? And if so, to what extent has it been? Whether it be an attempt to aid the channel or, tell the larger story to an audience in these two countries?
Is that a partnership?
Is that your question? You'll have to reiterate everything because, you're not audible. Why don't you come a little closer and go a little slow? We'll come back to you. I think you've had enough set of questions. Let the others ask questions too.
Sorry about that. So my question was, given the interest of the events in Afghanistan to viewers in India and Pakistan, has there been any sort of coordination between TOLO News and media outlets in India and Pakistan? Because, to what extent, if so? Because has there been like an attempt to aid or an attempt to share the larger picture to more viewers in India and Pakistan?
So I think we just answered that because he was talking about a collaboration wherein Islamabad, Kabul and Delhi, the three capitals went live against terrorism. They were reporting live against terrorism, so that was a common platform. You want to add something to that?
We are partnering with NDTV in Delhi, and we use our resources and also with a lot of Pakistani channels in Islamabad and Karachi, because we believe that if governments are not on good terms, it doesn't mean that media shouldn't be on good terms. And we do cooperate and work with each other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Afghanistan being a very terror-prone country, I would like to know about the mentality of especially the mothers, sisters, daughters and wives of journalists in Afghanistan.
Sorry, what was it?
He wants to know what is the mental framework of the wives, sisters and daughters of the journalists in Afghanistan. Am I right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, It's, as I said, it's a difficult country, but we all live there, and we do have a social life as well. I know that the security image of Afghanistan is very much portrayed, but that's not the whole story. We do party when we have the chance, and we do go out. We do hang out with our families. So journalists as well. I think some of us do have normal lives, Afghan standard, and our families. I'm married. My wife works in the government.
I think I would like to intervene, and I would like to know that episode that you were narrating about your mom not permitting you. I know it's a little personal, but then I think they must know that it takes a lot of stake to be there.
That's true. That's true. That's true. When the attack happened in 2016, my mother wasn't very happy about me continuing my work, and then it took some time for me to convince her that it's important for us to continue. Because, as I said in the beginning, it's not just about me. It's about the whole media industry. It's about 10,000 people working for Afghan media. And I was lucky that my mom understood, and she's happy that I'm in the country and we continue what we do.
And there's another narrative, I know the time is out, and that is that, when the wives are bidding the adieu to their husbands who are journalists, they actually meet them in a way that maybe they'll not see them tomorrow. So, that is the kind of an emotional transition that happens in every family of the journalists. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.